See if this works. All right, so we're going to try to conclude. Today on our study on the Arab-Israeli conflict. I don't need to talk to you anymore about the naming of that. That's the best we can do. But what I want to do today, yes.
Does that mean next week?
Quite possibly, yes. We'll see how today goes.
It's still a limbo.
That's right. So the intent of today is just to answer the so what. That's really the intent, is it not? Not just to grab all the information, but information for a purpose. So what's the purpose? What's the end result? What's the end goal to all of this conversation? I don't want the total of the conversation to go, stupid Muslims, right? No, I just said that when it's going to go out on the internet. I said I don't want the conversation to be that, okay? It is, why is this going on, and what is our role as believers in God Almighty? What do we do with this information? Because it's easy just to do that. It's easy just to go, this right here, right? We're right, they're wrong, rah, 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 rah. And that's easy to do that, even if they are, right? Even if they are incorrect. All right? So what is the point of all this? Now, before we get to that, I want to give you a little bit more information. Again, I'm going to point you to the gentleman that we watched last week. His name is Dr. Jay Smith, and Al-Fa'ad, the gentleman that he's with. And there was a point brought up last week about the gentleman that we watched, Al-Fa'ad, with Dr. Jay Smith. And he looks like you would think would be a Muslim. Okay? And he is, by heritage, by birth. Okay? And he even dresses in a very traditional garb, and it is very specific as to the way his head covering is folded, the way he wears certain clothing. That is very traditional. It's very rule-based. It's based upon law. So he tries to follow that as best he can based upon that and his particular beliefs. The beliefs he does not hold to, if you'll follow along, are the ones that have been perpetrated over the last 1,400 years concerning mostly Muhammad. Okay? That therein seems to be the biggest struggle that we have is in regards to Muhammad. Now, the reason why I bring this up, and the reason why I want to focus on the Muhammad story, is, we talked about the different sources. So we want to go to the Islamic accounts and the Islamic claims. So there's Islamic accounts, the writings, and there are certain claims. And one of those claims makes this veneration, this heroic account of Muhammad like he's the guy. So even when they say Muhammad, they have to say the Prophet Muhammad, may he be blessed, or versions of that. If you say his name, you have to say those phrases, okay? Because of turning him into this heroic figure. And the problem that we're running into now, the more and more we look at things, is we find out that the vast majority of the narrative surrounding Muhammad is false. Okay? So remember, we've talked a great deal about Mecca and Medina out in the Arabian Peninsula and how they literally didn't even exist until approximately 400 and something AD. And then the claims about Abraham and Ishmael going to Mecca and building the Kaaba over the top of the Zappa Zappa well. Okay? All of this sounds so almost farcical and like you would have a fantastic science fiction movie about all this. And at the Kaaba there is this thing called the Black Rock. There's a name for it. And there's this black rock that's embedded in the corner of the Kaaba, and now they've surrounded it with this silver eyelet. And as you circle counterclockwise, as you would in a pilgrimage around the Kaaba, if you get lucky enough, you can walk by and rub your hand across the black rock, and you'll be blessed. Because you circled the Kaaba, and you touched the black rock. Now, there's a story behind the black rock. The fact is, it's probably just a black obsidian of some sort. That there's a story that goes along with why it ends up there. Right. And so we look at all of these events and these things that are claimed about Muhammad and turning him into and it's really interesting because they're so set on not having idol worship. That is such a huge thing. You're not allowed to have an image of Muhammad. You're not allowed to, and you're supposed to say certain things about Muhammad. And at the same time, he's the most venerated person in all of Islam, except for Allah, right? So it seems so very contradictory. And now what we're finding out through research of guys like Dr. J. Smith and many others, not just 2 or 3 guys. These guys are very, very good about what they're doing. We're finding out that there may never even have been a guy by the name of Muhammad. That the writings about Muhammad and remember what the Quran means? Anybody remember what the word Quran means? I mean, it just means the recitation. So the retelling. That's all it means. And so Muhammad never wrote it down. Other individuals wrote the account of Muhammad down, that Muhammad spoke to them, and then they wrote it down. Okay? Now, you're thinking, well, that sounds ridiculous, right?
Sounds like the Bible, what they said about the Bible.
That's their claim about the Bible. So when we say all these kind of crazy things, we think, okay, you lay claim to these miraculous events in biblical account. Islam lays claims to miraculous things in the Islamic accounts, in the Quran and other writings as well. And so it's easy for us to go, oh, that's just ridiculous. A winged horse from Mecca to Jerusalem and back, and
Firing chariot.
Really? That's one of these, and so they say, your stuff sounds just as silly as our stuff, essentially, is what they say. But anyway, so what I want to do today is there's this video, and it is about 20, it's going to be about 20 minutes long. I may cut it a little bit short, but I want to show you some more evidence that Dr. J. Smith presents regarding the actual existence of Muhammad. Now, why is that important?
It kind of needs to exist for him to be a prophet.
Okay, so his existence is important for him to be designated as a prophet. To call him a prophet, he probably should have existed, correct?
Be helpful.
Okay, that's helpful. The other side of that is the importance of Muhammad is this is the foundational doctrine about the Quran. The Quran is the foundational doctrine behind this religion. And so if Muhammad never existed, then the recitation is fabricated. Okay? The recitation is fabricated. The recitation never existed. There are 4 caliphs. Caliphs are basically the chief priests, essentially. And so you've heard the term caliphate, right? And so each time a main caliph comes along, that's basically like a chief priest, they called it the next caliphate. Okay? So you've heard those come along. So these imams, you've heard those referred to, move up to caliph, and a caliph he's the top dog. And so there are 4 initial caliphates, and of those 4 initial caliphates, one of those establishes about 70% of Islam as a religion, and then they take off with their armies and start conquering people. And we'll see on the map where this happens. But I want to get to what Dr. J. Smith has to say about some of these things. One of the things he accounts, and we skipped over in the video, he spends about 5-10 minutes or more about coinage. And basically, if someone is a very important person throughout all of history, coinage has a lot to do with historical accounts, right? So what does Jesus say about give unto Caesar what is Caesar's? Well, what would be Caesar's? The coin with Caesar's face on it, right? If you go to Canada or the United Kingdom right now, on the money the new money it's being printed, whose face is on it?
Prime Minister?
King Charles. Okay? Used to be Queen Elizabeth, right? And so there, and on coinage the same way. So throughout history, you know, you go to a guy like Xerxes, there's coinage with Xerxes on the coinage because I'm the guy in charge and I'm so important that even the currency that you use will have my image on it. Okay? Again, they say no images of Muhammad, but then the caliphs come along and there are no coinage. There's no coinage in regards to the caliphs. And they're ruling, you'll see on the map, they're ruling basically from almost to Spain, Morocco, all the way over to the other side of Iran and up into Turkey. They're ruling that entire area. No coinage. There's no evidence of that. So anyway, I just said we skipped 4 or 5 minutes of that, and I almost did 5 minutes.
They're claiming that they own all this land.
Oh, sure.
There's no proof that they own all this land.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
All right. So let's see if we can watch this.
Hello everyone, this is Al-Fadi and I'd like to welcome you to a brand new video series that we are entitling The Search for Muhammad. And this title was intentionally chosen by Dr. J. Smith, whom I always have the honor of having here with us in studio, and he will be joining me shortly to go through this particular topic. Obviously, when we say The Search for Muhammad, it will give the impression that we are searching for a character that is unknown. And when we talk about Muhammad, traditionally speaking, again, I want to emphasize, traditionally speaking, it is perceived that he has existed for 1400 years, that if you want to learn anything about him, you can always go to the Quran, or you can go to the Hadith, that is collection of his own sayings, and better yet, you can go to his biography. However, what you will discover along the way during this video series that Dr. J. Smith, and I would tend to agree with him, will highlight a lot of controversial dates, geographical locations, and even things related to the origin of this character. Of course, I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but I would like to also remind our viewers that the topic about the existence of Muhammad is not new, at least from the perspective of what we are trying to do here, myself and Dr. J, because back in 2012, a gentleman by the name Robert Spencer published a book that was titled, Did Muhammad Exist? And you can see it right here. And I'm going to put it also in front of me just in case for the focus. And this was the first edition, and I say the first edition because right now we are in 2020 and Robert Spencer is in...
Okay, I'm going to stop for just a second. We're going to skip forward. Dr. Robert Spencer, probably the foremost authority on this topic, on the existence and the history of Muhammad. This is where a lot of these guys get their information from, his research over many, many years. And if you want some light reading, this book and its next version are incredible. There's a lot of phenomenal information and perspective to look at on the idea of whether Muhammad even existed. And again, that's important. Okay, so Dr. J. Smith talks about this for a little bit. I'm going to skip ahead. He's got a timeline. We want to get to that first. Let's jump right into the timeline. All right, here we go.
Talk about the emergence of Islam according to the Islamic traditions. The first thing we know is, according to the traditions, the traditions would be the Sirah, the Hadith, the Tafsir, the Tahqiq, those 4 genre of traditions. They all say that Muhammad was born in 570. And there's the date there. But what about when the Quran was actually revealed? We know that that wasn't revealed until 610, according to the traditions. I'm going to keep saying that, according to the traditions. And then we were told that he suddenly was woken up in the middle of the night in 621, and he was told to get on the back of a winged horse called the Burak, and he was flown up to Jerusalem. He was there living in Mecca, where he learned about the 50 prayers, which he then whittled down to 5 prayers, bouncing back and forth between the 7th and the 5th heaven, comes back down to Jerusalem and heads on back down to Mecca. So that's in 621. And then in 622, he moves from Mecca to Medina, known as the Hijrah. We're then told that he came back to Mecca, conquered it in 630, and then suddenly he dies in 632. So that is Muhammad's life. That is the narrative we have been given. That's the only narrative we have ever been told about his life. Now, I'm leaving an awful lot out just for sake of time. That's just the bare bones. But then we're told that after he dies, possibly by poisoning, Abu Bakr then takes over. So he rules for 2 years, and then he dies
Caliph
peacefully.
number 1.
He is replaced by Umar, who really only
Caliph number 2.
is able to be on the throne or as a caliph for 10 years. And then he is killed. So Uthman comes to power, and he rules from 644 to 656. While he is ruling, then the Quran is finally written down. It was compiled in 652, 652, that time period. That's the Quran that we have in our hands today. We're told. This is what we're told. This is what the traditions say. And so he is killed in 656, and then Ali comes to power, and he is the last of these, what they call the rightly guided caliphs.
Okay, I'm going to pause there for just a second. That's a pretty heavy-duty timeline right there. He does a really good job of laying that out. Now, again, making these claims that, well, the Quran wasn't even compiled until 30 years or 20 years after Muhammad passes away. And so there are those who will claim, wow, 20 years to compile the Quran of all his sayings and everything like after the guy dies? Where does our defense fall apart? What about the Gospels and the writings in the New Testament?
It was all like 70 years, wasn't it?
Yeah, within about 60 plus years, right? Yeah. So that's a claim we can't do. However, that's just on the Quran. And the Quran is only part. And then there's struggle over how the Quran was put together. Anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. It's information. So be careful about, well, they didn't even write the Quran until after the guy was dead, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Yeah. Same with us.
Period.
Yeah.
There you go. So there it is. Look at the timeline there. That is the only narrative we've ever been given. Now, are you happy with that? Are you happy with those dates? Are you happy with what you've seen right there on the timeline?
Well, I mean, this is what I grew up learning. This is what almost every Muslim who doesn't want to believe in anything outside of the tradition would disagree with this, because they accept these dates as if they are set in stone.
Okay. Where do you think this story comes from? Where do you think all these dates come from? Where do you think all these events that we have just seen up there on that timeline, where do you think they were written down? Or where would you like them to have been written down? Or let's say when. Not where right now, but when. When would you have liked them to be written down?
I mean, now, looking back, you would have loved for these things to be written almost immediately or within the lifetime of Muhammad, or like right after.
Yeah, by an
where
eyewitness.
you have eyewitness accounts.
Like we have with Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
We know that when Jesus, or when he was speaking, when he was talking, when he was moving around, he took a pile of disciples, 12 disciples with him, and 2 of them, John and Matthew, wrote down exactly what they remember seeing, and they wrote down what they remember hearing.
That's right.
And they wrote while they were still living. Obviously, otherwise how would you be able to write?
So you see the difference? Remember I brought that up. So the accounts of the Gospels, starting there, the accounts of the Gospels, the life of Christ, are written by, all but one, written by eyewitnesses. There's no claim of any of the caliphs or anybody who put together the Quran that they were eyewitnesses to Muhammad. Okay? Therein is the first disconnect. That's one I want you to look at. The first disconnect is eyewitnesses. Okay?
Troy.
Oh,
So
Sorry. So back earlier, it says that the Quran was revealed.
yes.
What was revealed? I mean, what
Okay.
do they think was revealed
So,
at the time?
so last week we shared the little cute little story that remember the girls did on the video. Hey, isn't that nice? Isn't that neat? Isn't that cute? You know, he hides in a cave because all of the people down in Mecca are serving these idol gods in the Kaaba, right? And so he righteously moves up into the cave up there. And while he's up in the cave, an angel of the Lord comes and reveals to him, read, read, read. Well, supposedly he was illiterate. Well, that may not be true. But anyway, supposedly he's illiterate, so he just has to remember all this. And so he speaks it as it's revealed to him, the Quran is. And so that's the only way it was ever produced, is by him recounting it, retelling it, or reciting it, which is what Quran means, the recitation.
So who would have been the scribe?
God.
Okay, So they literally claim that God's hand wrote the Quran. I mean, that's,
If you ask the defiant Muslim, yeah,
okay.
because that's been asked question. You go out and ask a Muslim, they were like, well, man wrote the Bible. Okay, well, who penned? And you ask who actually first put pen to paper and wrote down the recitation? And they will tell you it is by God.
I'm not overly smart, but God doesn't need to tell me something and then go do it himself.
Well, I mean,
Right?
he scribed the tablets, right? The Ten Commandments. That's their claim. God wrote the Ten Commandments on stone.
But he didn't tell Moses, read, write, and then go do the
But
thing.
then, right. But that's how they find their way out. They say, well, God did it.
Okay.
That's their answer to everything. If it's a miraculous, if it's a thing that doesn't make any sense, God did it.
Okay.
Are you limiting God? You know, that response. How dare you? Does that answer your question as well? Okay.
Written within 40 to 60 years after Christ's death. And the other two, Mark and Luke, got it from the eyewitnesses. So you have 4 testimonies of Jesus' life, 4 testimony of what he said and did by either the eyewitnesses or those who got it from the eyewitness, right?
That's correct.
No problem there.
That's correct.
So we would demand, I would assume the same thing of Islam, certainly about the companions of the Prophet. They should have written down what he said and did, right?
Yes.
Within their lifetime, not his, obviously, because he died in 632.
That's
Let me
correct.
show you what we now know. And I'm not going to go back to the timeline. So let's go to the next slide and let's look at this timeline here. Let's first put up Muhammad's death, 632. So there it is. He dies in 632. By this time, everything he said and did should now start to be written down. Just like that's what happened after Jesus died. You know, we have Paul writing within 15 years after Jesus died. We have the letters. And he didn't even see Jesus. He didn't even know Jesus. We know that Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written within 40 years of Jesus. Well, so certainly by 660, 670, they're all written down. John would have written by 690. So within 60 years of Christ's death, who died in 33 AD, we have now all 4 Gospels and all of the letters of Paul. We have the whole New Testament written down.
And even Paul, I mean, I know you said he didn't see Jesus. Well, what you're meaning, of course, he didn't live with him when he was on earth as one of his apostles. It was an encounter that took place after the resurrected Jesus, of course, met him on the way to Damascus.
Yeah.
And even there, Muslims attack Paul for what reason? For what you just mentioned. It's like, oh, he wasn't with him, right? You know?
Right.
And yet they give themselves the right, sadly, to attack the character of Paul. They attack the teaching of Paul. And here we are, dealing with an issue that is far worse than that.
We haven't proved that yet. Let's not prove.
Can I say something real quick? There is a group of people, and we'll call them Christians right now. And there's a group of Christians, churches, that if you say Paul writes, they will completely discount everything that Paul writes in the New Testament. These are Christian churches, and highly among the United Methodists. There's a reason for that. Okay, the reason that they discount Paul and all his writings, and they will refer to you as a Pauline. You're a Pauline, so you believe in the Paul's writings. Okay, if you bring up anything that Paul wrote, they will say Paul was not an eyewitness.
So they take out the Gospel
Discount
of
it.
Luke too, correct?
They discount it.
The discount Luke.
They say Luke was writing down the accounts of the eyewitnesses. That's their only way out of that. So basically, everybody but Paul is good. Anybody know why?
Because you didn't see Jesus?
No. They're going to claim that's the reason why they say no. What are some things that Paul says that currently the United Methodist Church says was not good?
Women in authority.
Number one.
homosexual.
Number 2. You're starting to mark them off. Paul was writing against some of the things that were happening in all these other churches. The United Methodist Church is currently engaging in nearly all of those things, and some of the other churches, the Episcopal Church and some others. And Paul wrote against all of those things. So if Paul was against all those things, what can we do? I just throw him out. We'll just start going through the Bible and ripping out pages. We don't like that. And then we'll make some sort of historical claim to say, oh, there's a reason why I don't believe what Paul wrote. Okay?
There was
the miraculous,
Road to Damascus.
yeah, I mean, there were revelations to him. Yeah.
So this is why this guy comes and says the Muslims will say, well, Paul wasn't an eyewitness. Paul didn't get there with Jesus, and Paul zero of the people who wrote down any of the Islamic accounts or claims were ever eyewitnesses to Muhammad. Zero.
So nobody claims that.
Nobody. They don't even claim it.
Okay.
Sorry, I got a little fired
So let's
up
go
there.
back to the timeline. There is where Muhammad died in 632. So you're saying that you would like someone to have written it down within certainly, really, let's say 40 to 60 years like we have with Jesus'
That's fine.
life.
That's fine. I mean, at least you have some eyewitness account.
Okay, let's see the first biography. The first biography of what Muhammad did is written by this guy here, Ibn Ishaq.
Right.
Look at his date, 765.
140 years already, or 30 years after Muhammad's death.
That's a problem, isn't it?
I mean, it's impossible that Ibn Ishaq lived for that long.
No, he did not live for him. It's obviously he was not living when Jesus was living. He did not know. I'm sorry, well,
Muhammad.
Jesus, of course, Muhammad was living.
Right.
He would not have known him. He would not have seen him. He would not have heard anything about him.
That's right.
So you cannot say he's an eyewitness. Did he get it from the eyewitnesses? We have no idea. We need to go back to that. Let's go back to the slides and let's take a look at where the dates are for this is written down. And we start with Muhammad's death. He dies there in 632. Where do we hear about his material, about his life? We go to Ibn Ishaq. Look at the dates there, 765. So you're talking about roughly, we're talking about 130 years later. Okay?
Right.
And in fact, here's the book right here. I've got it right here. This is the book that they always credited with Ibn Ishaq. So it says, The Life of Muhammad, a translation of Ibn Ishaq's Siratul Rasulullah, which means the biography of the Prophet
That's right.
Muhammad.
Sirat Rasulullah, exactly. That's a sirah right there.
That is a lie.
Yeah.
This is what everybody has been taught. This is what you have been taught. I have been taught that this was written by Ibn Ishaq. Look how thick it is.
Right, and the reason why people buy into it, because no one, sadly, either dares to publicly question it, or at least if they question it, they keep it to themselves and they don't bring it up out
Why?
front, basically.
And this is the
Infidel.
problem. We have this real deal. We're going to be talking about this later on. So let's go back to the slide. So then who wrote this? Not Ibn Ishaq. This is the guy that wrote it. Ibn Hisham. Look at his dates. 833. You're talking about 70 years later.
Right.
70 years later, Ibn Hisham takes what he likes of Ibn Ishaq, throwaways what he does not like
And
of
he
Ibn
expanded
Ishaq.
it.
We don't know if he took only 2% or 5%. We don't know how much he took. He threw out, so we don't have anything of Ibn Ishaq. We only have what Ibn Hisham. So really, this book here is Ibn Hisham's book. This is not Ibn
So,
Ishaq.
so let me say something here, an observation. What is it with these guys that take whatever they like and throw away or burn what they don't like? Because Uthman by now supposedly have done exactly the same thing.
Uthman did it?
Yeah.
Take a look. We're going to get, but before we get to that, I'm going to show you another example of that. We do know that there's one other person that writes a biography, and his name, I'm going to throw away Ibn Ishaq. Go back to the slide. I've thrown him away. He's now disappeared. Why? Because he just does not exist in this discussion. We know nothing from Ibn Ishaq. We know from Ibn Hisham. Now let's go. There's another biographer, and this guy is Al-Waqidi. He dies about 2 years later. His, interestingly, most people don't like to go to his. Why? Because it's all full of violence.
It's called Kitab al-Maghazi, the book of basically military campaign.
The military campaigns. That's why they don't like him. They'd
Yeah.
rather use Ibn Hisham
Right.
because that's much more politically correct.
Right.
So that's the biography. Those are the two biographies that we're looking at. But there's another genre, and that's what we know as the sayings. The sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, that is the hadith. The first to write them down in a categorized form, to compile them, is Al-Bukhari. Look at his dates, 870.
Right.
Now, notice, here's another example. Just like we have with Ibn Hisham, throwing away what he doesn't like and retaining what he likes. Al-Bukhari has given 600,000 of these sayings of the Prophet,
That's right.
and he's told to whittle them down and eradicate that which he didn't like. From the 600,000, he whittles them down to 7,397.
With some repetitions in it.
Yeah, in fact, exist in this discussion.
I'm going to pause for a second. Did anybody catch that?
Yes.
600,000 sayings of the Prophet Muhammad being accounted 220 years after the Prophet dies. he has the revelation in 610, right? He has the reading, the revelation come to him in 610. He dies in 632. In 22 years, do you think in the last 22 years that you could recount 600,000 things? Now, how long you guys been married? Huh? 51 years. Do you think you could account 600 things that he said verbatim?
He has limited vocabulary.
Do you think you could recount 600, not 600,000, 600 things that she has said in 51 years? What about in the last 22 years?
Not even yesterday.
I was gonna say, I can't remember 600 things from yesterday.
And we're talking about 600,000 sayings of somebody who died 220 years prior,
And no writings.
With no
who,
writings.
with no, that nobody wrote any of it down until this.
So so you understand, so that I understand this, the guy that they're talking about now, where did he get that from? Was it divine intervention? Is it put in his head these 600,000, or is it lore? Is it passed down through?
It's
families?
all oral tradition.
Okay,
because nothing was written down.
Claim the oral tradition.
Yeah.
Okay.
We know
Yeah.
how telephone works.
Yeah. Now, the other side that they will tell you, if you ask a Muslim, they will say, God wrote it.
What year?
Allah. It was Allah. That's your answer for all of it. Just Allah. He did. Don't question it, because if you question it, you're infidel. You're unfaithful, and you could be cut off, literally. All right, I'm gonna jump ahead.
Mentioned this a number of years ago, that this guy is the one that introduces the Shahada there on the coins and on the Dome of the Rock and also on the Caliphal Protocols. Look at his date, 692. So we're talking about 141 years after him that you start to get this narrative that he is introducing, right? But I want to go even one step further.
Okay, you see up in the top left-hand corner, you see those words, Sirah, Hadith, Tafsir, and Tariq. Okay? Those are the biography of Muhammad, the sayings of Muhammad, the commentaries on the Quran. In other words, the Quran was written. Now we're going to have commentaries on it. Be like the Book of Mormon, essentially. And then finally, Tariq is histories of mankind. And that one is odd. That's a whole different ballgame when it comes to that. And some of the groups, when we talked about the break between Sunni and Shia, some of it is over the last two of the writings, the commentaries and the histories of mankind.
As the Histories of Mankind a book.
The Histories of Mankind is a book, and that's where they try to make these recounts, reclaims back to Abraham to make it okay. And this is where the made-up genealogies come from. Okay? So, he's going to tell you right now, you see that Al-Tabari, 932, literally 300 years after Muhammad passes, he writes the Histories of Mankind to make those connections so that the growing Islamic faith can make their connection back to Ishmael. Now, why would they want to make the connection back to Ishmael? It makes it to Abraham, which means what?
They get the land.
We get it all. This gave them the right to conquer everything in the name of Allah because it belongs to us through Ishmael, through Abraham. That's their claim. That's it. This guy right here.
But it was never written down anywhere.
No,
But
not until these
for
dates.
us it was.
Yes. Okay. Are you starting to see it? Or have you finally seen it? We see it?
Are the letters at the beginnings of the names, are they titles or is it first names?
It's like when in Hebrew, you say ben somebody or bar somebody.
Okay.
It's always a connection, son of, attributed to, all these kinds of things. It's, again, when you say these names, if they were to say our name, they don't understand surnames. Okay, so your name would be Tracy Elam. It's just all one word, and Tracy's supposed to mean something, and Elam is supposed to mean something within the word.
There's no separation.
Correct. Now, and you see some separation there, but that means son of or Mr. or, that's basically their way of doing surnames.
Okay.
Okay,
So the progression here ultimately gets down to land and power.
you got it.
Hmm.
You saw it. Because right now, during this time, when you start seeing Al-Bukhari all the way down to Al-Tabari, all of these guys are during a time of the most
Dark Ages, isn't it?
well, it's during the Dark Ages. So Europe is weak. It's the Dark Ages. Europe is weak. Islam is growing, and they're wanting to take over everything. Europe is weak, which means also the Holy Roman Empire is basically non-existent, which means Constantinople falls, which means the Christian influence is not there anymore. And if Constantinople falls, Jerusalem falls at that time. Okay? So that's when Islam takes over, the Muslims take over the entire area, and they take over Jerusalem. Why do they take over Jerusalem? What's their reasoning?
Because they owned it.
The magic horse?
Oh.
See, they have to have a reason to go take over Jerusalem. Because it's a holy site now, because the guy that we think,
The horse landed there.
the horse landed there, and he spent the night there praying, and he found the 50 prayers that he whittled down to 5. You get that? Did you catch that?
Troy, okay, this in 600,
Yeah.
that really happened.
632?
You didn't make that part of it up.
632?
Yeah,
With Muhammad dying?
yes.
No, that's the whole point of this video. Is Muhammad
All
likely
of
never
this
existed.
today, but
This
when
entire
did the
video-
Muslims start taking over? I mean,
He supposedly he did some campaigns to take over some land, but then following him, they start conquering. And there's another map too, but I won't show that too. There are different caliphates, and as these caliphates, these different guys come into power, they start taking over land, and that happens over the next 300 years, and then some.
and during this 300 years, they're making all these stories.
Absolutely.
To get them back to Abraham.
Absolutely, to give them the right to go do so.
Okay.
And the reason why is because guys like Muhammad and the people who are directly related to him, remember where they live? They live in the Arabian Peninsula, supposedly, okay? The Arabian Peninsula, which means they were, anybody want to guess the tribe? Hamites! But they can't have that, can they? They can't have the fact that they're Hamites, because if they're Hamites, they can't claim who? Abraham.
And they needed other land because their land was worthless, because they didn't know there was oil in it.
Right. And if they did, who cares, right? Right? So they had only one spice in Mecca that was worth anything. And then, so that's no big deal. They're out in the desert. They're near the Red Sea. There's no water. There's no resources. So now they have to just go get it. And then claim it in the name of Allah.
So, if someone says they're Muslim,
Yes.
does that automatically say that they're from Muhammad?
No.
Is Muslim
For example, I'll
Indian?
I'll say this way. The gentleman we're looking at right here, and there's a name for the way he wears that. He would consider himself Muslim by birth. Okay, same as we would say. I would say I'm. Well,
American by birth.
well, no,
Exactly.
it's a belief
Exactly.
system. No, it would be more than that.
Would it be Native American?
Let me try to say this the right way. Gosh, okay. I hope I don't upset anybody. Kind of don't care. People who are Catholic but never ever have. Okay, so our family has always been Catholic for the past 400 years. We don't do anything with the Catholic Church, but we're Catholic.
The same as the obituary that says they've been a member of the Church of Christ
Precisely.
for 47 years.
Precisely.
Nobody here's ever seen
Nobody ever knows. Right.
My dad was a birthright Quaker because he was born into a family that was Quaker.
That's a great illustration. A birthright Quaker. There you go.
So, just so say you meet somebody and they say they're Muslim.
Yeah.
Not assume
Do not assume that they are faithful followers of.
So you can have a person who is Muslim
Uh-huh.
that is a Christian as well.
Yeah, I have a friend in Florida. His name is Z. That's the best way to say it. And he claimed to me, he came to me and talked to me, and he said, look, I'm Muslim by birth. I'm Christian by faith, by choice. He
So
said,
if you talk to him, he'd say, I'm Muslim Christian.
yes, I'm a Muslim Christian, right. I'm Muslim heritage. I'm a Christian by faith.
Race-ish?
Kind of.
Kind of like saying Jewish.
Jewish brother-in-law and Jewish daughter-in-law, either one of them were practicing Jews.
Yeah, but the difference is with Z is he's Muslim by birth but Christian by faith. So there's a difference in there. So anyway, okay.
Dean, you're safe for another week, I do believe.
Yeah.
We're getting closer all the time.
Or another
All
one.
the questions are for us.
You can time it, take care of that kidney.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Dummies that shut up, huh?
Okay. Let's look at this real
They
quick.
all say it happened in those two cities that are
And
circled
the
in green.
Ottomanic basically recension took place there, and the decimation of the Quran took place from there. I mean,
That's
the
what they're
tradition.
telling you.
That's right.
Look how far south they are. All right?
Right.
I'm going to say absolutely not. And this is where people need to start looking at a map and show where all these guys who are writing these things, where these guys came from. Let's start with our good friend. First of all, let's ask where is it that they all are residing? They're living in a place called Baghdad. Now remember, be careful. The name Baghdad comes into existence in the 9th century. Before it was the 9th century, it was called Ctesiphon. I'm going to use the word Baghdad. I know some people will jump on me. Yasser Qadi jumped on me for calling it Baghdad at the time of Uthman. If I were to say Ctesiphon, no one knew what I was talking about. You always use the modern day name. So Baghdad is the name. Let's take a look at Baghdad. There it is up there. Fascinating. It's 1,800 kilometers north of Mecca. That's a huge distance. People aren't putting this on a map. What's more, we also know that Ibn Hisham is the one that writes what we know is the biography. He was actually born in Basra, but he did his work in Cairo. And actually,
Okay, gotta stop. Basra. Basra is near ancient Ur. Abraham originated in Ur of the Chaldees. All right? So now where did some of the Hamites end up? Who were some of the descendants of the Hamites? Egypt. One of the names that was given to the Hamites was, and later called, Egypt. Look where this guy is from, Ibn Hisham. He does his work in Cairo. Cairo is in Egypt. He's from Ur. He's from the Chaldees. He's from Kuwait, essentially. Okay? So none of this is matching up. None of these people were in the area of Medina and Mecca. If Mecca is the center of Islam, why are these people not in Mecca writing about the Prophet Muhammad? Why?
So would that be the same difference as Paul being in,
Rome.
living in Rome and,
Growing up in Rome.
okay.
Yeah. It's very
They
similar.
wouldn't know anything about
No.
Matthew or any of them being in
No.
totally different.
Gosh. Okay.
I know we keep screwing with you, but
And there you go. There's just real quick. All these other guys. Al-Bukhari, Al-Tabari. Look at where Bukhara is. Yeah. This is where the writings occur. How many of them occur in Mecca and Medina?
doesn't look like any of them.
0. If this is the center of this new religion that is conquering, by this time, had conquered all of that land that you see. It conquered it all. So if Mecca is the center of all of that, why are all of these leaders and writers of this religion 1,800 to 3,000 or more, 2,800 kilometers away from Mecca? Why are they thousands of miles away from the center of their religion? Based upon the Prophet Muhammad.
Trying to make a name for themselves.
None of it makes sense. In fact, there is claim now that the historical record says that if there was a guy by the name of Muhammad, he didn't live in Mecca. He lived near Baghdad, what is currently Baghdad. And if he lived in that area, he was likely not an Ishmaelite. He was not any of those people. He was not related to any of them. Okay? This is such a conglomerate of garbage that it's just, none of it can possibly be accurate and true other than to make a claim to money, land, and power. I'm going to stop it there because see all that stuff? Now, we talked earlier about there's Mecca and Medina and alternate Shur, and you see Jordan, Amman. Amman, Jordan is the capital. Right where Jordan, see if I can do it with cursor. Can everybody see the cursor? No, you can't. Okay, you see just above the A on alternate Shur, you go up into that area up in there. All the mosques, anybody know where all the prayer vestibules, there's a name for it. Where do they all point?
Towards Mecca.
Mecca, except for the oldest ones. The original mosques don't point to Mecca. Anybody want to guess where they point? Look at the A in alternate Shur and that red line that goes up towards Jordan. Right where those two intersect in the line of Jordan and alternate Shur.
Oh, in Iraq.
Nope, it's in Jordan. And there is a place in Jordan called Petra. Ever heard of Petra? See, Mecca is described as this crescent with two mountains. Remember, we talked about how Hagar ran between the two mountains and there was a spring there? Guess was in Petra, in the land of Petra? Two mountains on either side with a valley, and guess what was down in the valley at one point? A spring. Temples were built there. If you look at the original mosques that were built, all the prayer areas were pointed essentially towards there. When all of these guys came along that we've been talking about, all of those old mosques had to be altered, and they placed a new vestibule in there, readjusted toward Mecca.
Which is east.
And then, well, Mecca's not necessarily east if you're in Amman, Jordan.
But
If you're in Amman, Jordan, your prayer thing points towards Mecca. Wherever you're at in the world. Wherever you're at in the world, that prayer area points towards Mecca. If you're north, you point south. So everything had to point towards Mecca.
so in Wilmington, you point east.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's basically, I mean, but if you were in Colombia or, say, Chile, you would point northeast. All right, so we're going to try to finish up here in just a second. Anyway, no, Gene, you're off for another week, buddy. All right, here's what I want to do next week. Okay, here's what let's do next week. Let's finish with this. What I want to do next week, we're going to ask this question. We're going to come to the conclusions. Why the fight? And I want you guys to, if you have any questions or anything that you're like, hey, I've been thinking about this. Why is this the case? Come up with those for next Sunday. When you have those for next Sunday, we'll try to address as many of those as possible. But we'll try to answer these questions according to biblical sources, according to Islamic sources, and according to historical, archaeological, geographical sources, which is right. Okay? Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Troy.